Grab your reading glasses, Wargamers, because today we're reviewing one of the hidden gems of this incredible hobby on today's edition of The Joy of Wargaming. Specifically, we are talking about a fun little collection of rules called Pub Games, produced by Miniature Wargames magazine. A beer drinker's dozen to play in your local. For those of you that don't speak British, that means in your bar. You're probably wondering why I've got all of this junk out on my counter today. Well, that's called production values, my friend. I'm helping set the ambiance for how these games are intended to be played. All 12 of these games are beer and pretzel games in their literal sense. They are games that you play with bowls of pretzels and what the authors refer to as pints. There's much to recommend about this particular book. The writing is sharp and it is snappy, and each of the 12 rules, which we're not going to talk about all 12, I'm just going to hit a few highlights to show you how much fun this collection is. But the writing is, it's written as though the guy is, well, let's see, I should probably tell you that it's written by Ian Dickey. The rules are not presented in a dry fashion. They are not the kind of clinical, technically well-written rules that you find in larger and more bloated sets. Instead, reading through these rules is like being taught a game by your friend in the pub, who calls you an idiot on several occasions. I don't think Ian does that, to be honest with you, but he does have all sorts of fun and sly little asides. So, if we take a look at the contents, you can see that these rules run the gamut. Skyfighter Rules is essentially a dogfighting. Degenerate Empires, Bandit Country, Out in Space, no one can remember whose round it is dogfighting spaceships. There's a gladiatorial game, Greek boar hunt, simple Napoleonic naval rules, barroom jousting, and so on. All written with tongue planted firmly in cheek. For example, I particularly enjoyed the rules for Wargaming Highlander in the Pub, which gives you a brief introduction of the Jacobite rebellions of 1715 and 1745, and then mentions that during that era, the Highlanders were engaged in the single most important aspect of any war, and that's stealing each other's cattle. The game is actually about stealing cattle from each other, not fighting the Jacobite War. It's just that kind of sense of dry humor that I think it's phenomenal. I think it's a lot of fun. The games are written to be played, as I said, written to be played with this as your terrain. In many cases, the measuring tape that you will be using is, now I don't have any beer mats. I'm not a pub, but I do have a nice, friendly and warm little coaster to keep me out of trouble with the wife. But if this was a pub, or even your kitchen table, after you've put away the 4-hour war game, the big complete reenactment of the storming of Normandy or what have you, and you're hanging out and you had a few beers, but you still want to get one more hit of wargaming, that's where these come in. And they're all designed to be played with just a few dice. Like I said, you don't even need a tape measure. You can use beer mats for measuring. In some cases, the beer mats are used for terrain, or you might need a handful of miniatures. So for the spaced dogfighting game, it's actually not a zipping around dogfighting game. I've got some just plastic toys. This is a Chinese plastic knockoff of the old Silent Death miniatures, and upscaled to a certain extent. And the way that space game is written, each of your ships has, call it 20 thrust units. You can call them Tidarium crystals or unobtainium gas, what have you. Those crystals represent how much thrust you can apply, and you can apply thrust in the 4 cardinal directions, north, south, east, west, and every time you apply thrust, you lose one. If you manage to get within 6 beer mats of one of your opponents, you roll a d6 and compare it to a chart. You may set your enemy spinning, and on his turn, he's going to have to spend 1 thrust to stop the spin. Or you may get a penetrating hit. You may can do a number of things. It can knock out his weapon so that every time he fires it, there's a 50-50 chance it just doesn't work. It can knock out one of his star drives, so when he tries to apply thrust, there's a 50-50 chance it doesn't work. And that's important because inertia is at play. So if this ship has been applying thrust at 2 to the west, he's down to 18 thrust and he's moving this way. So he's going to move 2 beer mats in the western direction because he doesn't want to slam into this can. He can apply 1 unit of thrust. So now he'll move 2 forward and 1 up. You have to be very judicious. What you wind up with is essentially a battle in an asteroid field where you're jockeying for position, but you have to be very measured and very careful in how you apply your thrust. The dogfighting game is very similar. However, you use turn templates that are listed here. Of course, you'd have to photocopy these. And these are the ways that you turn. So you have to be very careful not to run into the terrain. You only shoot forward, and you hit on a... if I remember how the rules work, if you do get somebody dead in your sights, you only hit on a 6 if they're moving parallel. But if you're getting right behind them, you have a 50-50 chance of tagging them. So it's a little harder to hit. But that results in a game where you're doing a lot more jockeying and you're zipping around, and it's a lot easier to avoid the materials, but it's also a lot harder to line up that perfect kill shot. These are the kind of games that you play. Another one that's particularly enjoyable is there is a war about Pink Gin Time is another fun one. All you need is a warship model each, D6, beer mats, and essentially it's a naval steamship game. I like the Nomad Hordes. This is a game where the geometry of the setup is basically that you're all border princes, and all of the players seated around the table border the nomad steplands. And it's essentially a money-making game where you put your figures on a beer mat in front of you. You get 15 giga-talents every turn, and you have to use those to buy defenders for yourself and to bribe the hordes, which you don't need figures for. So you may have, you have 1 militia, and you may buy 2 cavalry, and then you use as much of the money that's left to bribe the hordes to attack the guy next to you. And it's all fairly random. So what you're really doing is trying to maximize the odds that the hordes attack somebody near you. After all of the horde attacks are done, if you get assaulted by the nomads and you've bought too small of a defensive army, then they'll steal all your money and you're left with nothing. You have to rebuild from scratch. The idea is that you build those 15, and so you're trying to be as efficient as possible with your money, both for buying and for bribing. And at the end of the evening, you go around and you do the attacks. At the end of the evening, after however many turns you play, whoever has the most giga-talents left in his town treasury is declared the winner. So it's a bit of an economic game and a bit of a strategy game. And it's a bit of a cooperative game, if you will. At any rate, it's a lot of fun. The one downside to these pub games, now I'm probably not ever going to do a Let's Play of these, because one of the downsides, particularly as I film this, and the nation has lost its collective mind, and we are actually, appropriately enough, I'm reviewing a game called Pub Games at a time when all of the pubs are closed. I film these episodes a few weeks in advance. It's one of the reasons I don't talk about real current events, because things move too fast. Long story short, these games all require multiple players. They're all written for a minimum of 4, and really anything up to 10 to 12 can be done. That's a strong point normally. Maybe not so much now, but normally that would be a strong point. However, that said, I do recommend picking up a copy of this. 1, because it's so much fun to read. 2, because you get 12 solid beer and pretzel rule sets that will set your mind to churning. One of the pleasures of this hobby is reading a very simple rule set and packing that information into your head and then playing with it, trying to figure out, well, how would this play out? What kind of strategy would I use? What can we add to this game? What other additional flavors can we use? For example, the dogfighting game I've played several times with my kids, and that's another strong point for this. All of these games are suitable for introducing kids to wargaming. They are that simple, but they are deep enough in their strategy for you to get some pleasure out of them. But as I was saying, half the fun is figuring out how the rules work. And even if you don't get a chance to play all 12, it's a heck of a lot of fun. And I simply adore this kind of, I believe, as the author would refer to it, grotty production values. It's, I don't know, I don't have to know, I can look it up. It's 80 pages, it's center stapled. It reminds me of the old 1970 zine fandom, and I say that as a compliment. You don't need a lot of glitz, you don't need a lot of gloss. You have a strong authorial voice, you've got solidly written rules and games that are just dang fun. And if you're doing it right, you've got terrain, gulp, that moves and adds to the challenge. Boom. And if you're really lucky, I don't know if you can hear it, but I can hear it. You've even got your drunken redneck neighbors whooping and hollering at 10:30 on a Tuesday night to just add a little more of that barroom brawl ambiance to the evening. That's all I've got for tonight. As I said, Pub Games, Miniature Wargames magazine, written by Ian Dickey, a heck of a lot of fun. Beer and Pretzels games, literally the way they were meant to be played. Highly recommend it. Get yourself a copy, and whether you do or not, thanks for watching. Do the YouTube shuffle if you've got the gumption to do so. You know, there's bells and likes and things and thumbs, and you know what to do. Have a great day. God bless y'all.